Hello, it's Karen Tui Boys from Spectrum TV, and welcome to another episode. Today I have Catlin Tucker with us from the US, and she's going to be talking about blended learning. This is such an important topic right now in New Zealand as schools have gone back, and actually in Australia as schools are going back as well. And we are having to cope with some children at school, some children still at home, and how do we actually blend the two as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. But I want to let you know that I met Catlin in Cape Town, South Africa in November. And not only was she a star at the conference we were speaking at, she also personally inspired me, because she and her children climbed Table Mountain. And I said, well, what's it like? And she said, oh, no, it's good, do it. And she encouraged me. And so on my 51st birthday, on the actual day of my birthday, I climbed Table Mountain. Now, I'm not a walker, I'm not a climber, and I nearly died. No, not really. 2.5 hours was supposed to take. It took me 3, but the rush and the excitement and the adrenaline of actually achieving that, because my goal when I turned 50 was to be fabulous at 50. So, Catlin, thank you for inspiring me to do that. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, that was quite a climb. I'm very impressed.
I was too. So thanks for that. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I live in Northern California. I was a teacher for 16 years, and I have taught traditional, teacher-led whole group. I've taught blended. I am now working as a blended learning coach. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I am finishing up my doctoral work on teacher engagement in blended learning courses. I'm so close. I'll be done in July. All things working in my favor. And so, yeah, blended learning is definitely a passion of mine. And I tell people, the only reason I'm still in education right now is because of blended learning, because I was about 5 years into my teaching career and I thought, oh my goodness, I have made a huge mistake. This is not what I thought I was signing up for. The reality in my classroom was nothing like the fantasy I had imagined when I was working on becoming a teacher. And I thought, gosh, maybe I need to go find a different job. And it was really in that moment of career crisis and deciding to try something different that led me into this space of blended learning and has made me such an outspoken kind of cheerleader for blended learning, because it really did kind of save my career in education.
And obviously impacted the students in a different way as well.
Yeah, because I imagine kids, bounding through my door, eager, excited to learn. We were going to sit in circles and talk about literature and life, and that did not happen. And I actually went on maternity leave and taught a few online courses as an online professor. And when I came back to my traditional classroom, I thought, I want to try to weave in some of those online components where I saw a lot of potential in the power of those online components while I was teaching, remotely. And it was seeing the way kids engaged and how excited they got that really sparked my enthusiasm for blended learning.
Wonderful. So can you explain, Catlin, what is blended learning?
So blended learning, when I describe it to people, you can look up a definition that's like a paragraph long. But for me, I describe it as a teacher and a coach is active engaged learning online combined with active engaged learning offline. And it's that active engagement in both mediums that's really important to me personally. And blended learning is like this umbrella, and underneath the umbrella are different models. So there are a bunch of different blended learning models, and they are designed to give students more control over the time, the place, the pace, and or the path of their learning. And different models give them different degrees of control over those different elements of their learning. And I think that's really exciting, because at the core, what blended learning is this shift from teacher to learner. So that can be very scary for teachers.
So the shift is for the teacher to move into that learner space.
Well, and to allow the learner more opportunities to have like choice and voice, that agency in deciding, what do they want to focus on, or how do they want to do something, or how do they want to demonstrate that they've learned something.
Fantastic. So why is this so important, particularly right now? We're in the middle of COVID-19. Why is this blended learning important?
I think it's important because I feel for the teachers who had less than a week's notice that they were going to be taking their offline courses and moving them entirely online. And teachers who have been blending, they have been using some of these strategies. They've been leveraging technology to engage kids online. They've been playing with different computer programs before this. This shift online is going to be a lot less jarring. This online learning landscape is going to be much less foreign, and they're going to feel maybe not totally comfortable, but more comfortable than a teacher who has really been teaching offline, whole group instruction, very teacher led. It's very scary to try to imagine what that looks like online. And my fear is, yes, this pandemic has stopped everything, but even in California before this, we had wildfires that closed schools for a week, and then we had rolling blackouts to avoid wildfires that were closing our schools for days and days at a time. And we just live in this moment with technology where learning shouldn't have to be interrupted like that. Kids shouldn't be disconnected from each other, from their teachers, from their coursework. We have this opportunity to make this learning really fluid. And so I see it as exciting because technology opens up all these possibilities in terms of personalizing learning and allowing kids to drive the learning. But it also allows us to not be in this situation where there are literally kids right now who are doing very little learning because of this situation.
Absolutely. And of course, there is the gap. We still have the inequity with people who have the technology at home and the people who don't.
Exactly.
So that is a bit of a challenge. And we've been very fortunate in New Zealand that our Ministry of Education has done a whole rollout to ensure that as many families as possible have some form of device in their home. It's unfortunate that it's taken a pandemic for that to happen, and to really understand that learning isn't just between those four walls in our classroom, that it is can be all the time and in different pace, and as you said, personalised, which is fantastic. So can you explain some of maybe just one of the models? What's for someone who's never done this before? They're suddenly having to transition online. What are some of the key ideas and strategies?
Well, I think as teachers are, when I wrote my first book on blended learning, because I've written a few of them now, but my first one was in 2012, and people would say, "Oh, you wrote a book? That's so exciting. What's it about?" And I said, "Blended learning." Nobody knows what this is. And I would say, "Well, have you ever heard of the flipped classroom?" And then some people would say, "Oh yeah, I've heard of the flipped classroom." And I think that's because of Sal Khan and Khan Academy got really popular, and people are like, "I understand that. I make videos. They watch them online." And so for me, when I think about blended learning models, and I think particularly about like the online space, when teachers move online, we have three primary roles. We're instructor, we're designer, we're facilitator. So then what does that look like online? So teachers who have been kind of playing with the flipped classroom and leveraging video so that they don't have to spend their kind of precious time with kids explaining the same thing over and over again, they are probably more comfortable making videos of themselves, providing instruction, explanations, transferring information, maybe modeling things for their students, and putting that online so students can self-pace through it and consume that information or that explanation at a pace that works for them. They can pause it, they can rewind it, they can watch it 5 times, Karen, if they need to, right? The teacher doesn't have to say it 5 times, which is amazing. And so they're understanding that.
And nobody knows that they need to watch it 5 times. And that's what I actually love, because it's not like in a classroom and they're sitting there feeling dumb because they didn't get it the first time.
Right.
So they can do it over and over and over again. And nobody needs to know that their learning style takes a little longer, or today they got it straight away, or today they didn't. And so it helps with the self-esteem, of course, as well, doesn't it?
I absolutely agree. And if you even think about kids who they were out of it that day, they were daydreaming, they had something on their mind, there's a lot coming into the school in their kind of virtual backpacks that we don't know about. And the kids who transfer late, you get a lot of teachers with a lot of movement in their classes throughout the year. And you get a kid that transfers in like 3 months into the school year and they've missed all this instruction. But if you have it in videos, these bite-sized videos, they still have access to that. So there's so much value in kind of thinking about how to leverage video for sure, whether it's during a pandemic like this or just in our everyday teaching lives.
And on a previous episode of Spectrum TV, we actually had Julian Mayer from Australia talking about how to make videos, because for many teachers that was just like completely brand new, and he was able to give us just some little quick ideas and strategies. So
nice.
that was wonderful. And so there's the flipped classroom. So what are some of the other ways?
So one of the ones that's really popular in the States, which takes a very different form when you move entirely online, but like the station rotation is a really popular model because you don't need to necessarily have one-to-one in the classroom to make it work. So there are a series of stations in the classroom, students rotate through them. And the idea is that at least one, if not more than one, is an online learning station where students can pace through information online or collaborate with peers online. And what I like about that one is it really does make it very easy to balance the online with the offline. So when I'm coaching teachers and we're designing a station rotation, my advice is move them from an online task to an offline task to an online task to an offline task. And then also think about things like, is this an individual task? Is this a collaborative task? Because one of my concerns, whether it's using technology remotely or using it in the classroom, so often I see technology used to isolate learners instead of connect learners. And there's so much potential to have kids having conversations and collaborating and creating shared products, even if they're not in the same room together, which I think is exciting.
Can you give us an example of like an activity or what that might look like when they're online collaborating?
Yeah. So even now, I know teachers so for example, my background is English, and often when you're reading a novel, let's say, it's grounded in some kind of historical context. And so you could have a Google, slide deck. You could invite 5 kids to collaborate on that slide deck. You could have directions built into the slide deck, or you could have topics at the top of each slide. And then their job is to work over the course of a week or two to research their topic, put together a multimedia slide deck. And then for those teachers who are really comfortable online, they could ask students to do basically a video call, record themselves presenting their slide deck full of information. Like, this is what we found out about this topic. And then post it on your website so kids can watch each other's videos. So there's so many cool things you can get kids doing. And in this moment where they're all, isolated in their homes, I have to imagine that, like me, they are craving connection with people and wanting to interact. And so let's give them ways that they can do that while still meeting some of our kind of academic goals for them.
Right. And so you talked about making sure there's that balance between the online and the offline and the individual and the collaborative. When teachers are solely, some of us right now, just teaching online, how do we balance that a little bit more?
So, and that's such a good question, because I think right now everybody's tunnel vision. We're like, okay, we were all offline and now we're all online. And I'm like, wait a second, let's not lose that balance. Like, even if kids are accessing their assignments online, so maybe they're logging into their learning management system every morning or at the start of each week, or logging into Google Classroom, why not create like a choice board of offline activities, things that they can do that's going to drive them away from the screen? Because quite frankly, they're little beings and they don't, I don't think it's a good idea for them to stare at a screen for 5, 6, 7 hours a day. Like, I want them to have tactile, experiential kind of learning moments in their days as well. So if you put together, and I shared one on my website, but if you put together an offline choice board, then you can say to students, one of your assignments this week is to choose one of those activities. And then I think the issue becomes teachers want to see what kids are doing. They want to make sure they're actually engaging in these activities. So I tell teachers, encourage your students to treat their offline learning like they're making a documentary. Can they take pictures? Can they take video? Can they do a time lapse? And then have them submit some documentation with a reflection. What did they do? What did they enjoy? What was challenging? What bumps did they hit? What questions do they ask? Do they want to ask? So I feel like there are still ways that we can encourage them to go offline and have these experiences. And then whether it's documentation or whether it's like a reflection, having them share those pieces with you online so you can kind of appreciate the wonderful work they're doing when they're not in front of their computer.
And that really resonates with me because that's Art Costa's work of the metacognition and the reflection and going back. Yep. And it's not just about doing the work. And even John Dewey said many, many years ago that it's not the experience that we learn from, it's the reflection of the experience.
Yep.
And so whether they are, just out there gardening and they do a reflection on that or with whatever it is. And for viewers, if you go to the Spectrum, and I'll put this link below, but if you go to the Spectrum Education site, under free stuff, there are there's 2 grids for young children, I think 2 or 3, maybe 2 for teenagers, and there's a couple of adult grids as well. The adult grid is like, I don't want an adult today. So like,
I don't want an adult today. I'm done.
Cream from the tub and then lick the bowl. Just on those days, you really just don't want an adult when you're in lockdown. There's some great ideas. So, yeah. No, I can
Maria, you remember Maria from Cape Town, yes. Maria Hersey, Dr. Maria Hersey. She and I collaborated on some well-being boards. So your idea of I don't want an adult today, it's different. But I was thinking, I want to put together like a health and wellness choice board, like activities that really get teenagers being a little bit more mindful in fun ways that hopefully they can connect to. And then Maria was like, Catlin, we should make one for teachers. And she used the analogy of like the face mask in the airplane. She's like, if teachers aren't taking care of themselves, if they're not really focused on nurturing themselves and their well-being, they're not going to have anything left for kids in this moment where we're all tired and we're stressed and we're anxious and we're scared. And so we ended up putting together a well-being board for teachers, one for teenagers, and then one for elementary kids with their parents, because I think that building in those activities and just really acknowledging that we are these whole people that are multidimensional with a lot going on and kind of honoring that in our practice is really valuable.
Fantastic. Are we able to get a copy of those?
Absolutely.
All right. I'll put them, when I get a copy, I'll put them in the link so that people can download. Thank you.
I'll give you my offline choice board too.
Okay, thanks. We've got a lot of people saying hi in the chat, and so Lily's saying all of this fits really well with IB, which it absolutely does. And yeah, so if you've got any questions for Catlin, just let me know and just type them in there and we can ask you those. But I want to know, if a teacher's never done this blended learning before, where should they start? What's the first thing they should do?
Yeah, well, when I work with teachers, I always tell them choose one model, one piece of technology, get excited, but start small, because it really is a change in mindset, in the way you see your role as the teacher. I know since I transitioned to blended learning, I used to think of my role very much in the traditional sense of I am the subject area expert. I am going to just, shower all of my knowledge all over everybody. And I really have taken a step back in the years since I transitioned to blended learning, and I see my role so differently now. Like I see myself as an architect of learning experiences where I'm kind of building the outline, but kids are going to do the work. They're going to actually build the structure, right? And I see myself as a coach, really focusing on designing learning experiences with teachers where they have time to sit next to students and look at what they're doing and give them feedback along the way and have conversations with them. So when I talk to teachers, I'm like, just start with something small, because once you have one success, you can build on that. So if you're not in a pandemic and you're in your classroom, maybe start with a station rotation, and maybe it's a 4-station rotation, and 3 of the stations are things you've already done with kids before, and 1 station is something new. Or if you're a teacher online right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I've never done any of this. Maybe it's finding one great video that you like online and then creating some kind of an engagement around it. Maybe you pair it with discussion questions and try to get kids having conversation. Maybe you build a lesson around it using a tool like Edpuzzle, where you drop, questions into the video. So just one thing, see how it goes. And my advice for teachers, ask your students for feedback. Do not be afraid to just say, this is totally new. I'm just giving it a whirl. I need feedback. I want to know what's working for you, what's not working for you, so I can try to make this experience better. I think kids really respect that honesty, and they appreciate that we want to learn from their experience.
That's fantastic. And I love that idea of being an architect. I spoke at a conference in San Francisco maybe 5-6 years ago. And when you speak at conferences, as you know, you can't go to all the sessions, but there was a session there that I really wanted to go to. And the name of it was Never Work Harder Than Your Students.
Yes.
And there's a book, I've never read the book. I just love the title. And I'm like, yes, but that's what it's about, right? I love that idea of being an architect, and you are building the foundations and the structure for the students to be the learners and to be able to do the work. Because so often the teachers are doing the learning and then just spouting
That's why we're exhausted. That's why we are so exhausted. That's literally, my last book was called Balance with Blended Learning, because I just feel like we might be doing this job all wrong. I feel like teachers do so much of the heavy lifting, and so many parts of our job, at least the way I was taught to teach, are not sustainable. Like it's not sustainable as a, full-time English teacher to have 160 students, and I'm supposed to grade every single thing they touch. I'm supposed to regularly communicate with all those families. Like, why aren't we teaching kids how to own the conversation about their learning? Why aren't we teaching kids how to track, monitor, and reflect on their progress? I think there are ways to reimagine the way we design and facilitate lessons to create the time and space so that we aren't taking so much home with us, and we're really allowing kids to own some of this in the classroom in a really meaningful way.
And I like that heavy lifting, so that it's their responsibility. That they do the work, not us. Yes. So
right. We're their partners. We're there to support them. But we went to school. We did this.
That's right. Yes. So I've got a couple of questions. Is blended learning just another name for something that we're already doing? Is what somebody...
I think there are plenty of teachers who are doing some dynamic things with technology that maybe are dipping their toes into this world that maybe they haven't put a label on it, but there are very specific models, and they're, typically if you're using the flipped classroom, if you're using station rotation where kids are learning online, if you're playing around with individual playlists, then you are doing blended learning. But if you're just using a piece of tech here or there and you're not really engaging kids, you're not actively differentiating and personalizing, then, maybe it's not quite blended learning.
Yeah, good distinction. Thank you. I have another question from Brittany, and I think Brittany's in Texas. So when you're doing station rotation models, do you suggest putting a time limit on each of their rotations? And do you gauge the room and have them rotate when the chatter becomes chit-chat or they're less productive? She says she has 90-minute classes. So what's the
Yeah, that's a really good question, Brittany. So I've done it multiple different ways. So there is teacher timed rotations where when I'm coaching a teacher and they're using station rotation, if they have a 90-minute block, maybe they do 4 20-minute, stations with some transition time and some kind of buffer time in the beginning or the end of the period. And typically I like teacher timed rotations when the teacher is leading a teacher led station, which I really encourage teachers to do so that you're differentiating, you have that small group instruction time. But if you're not leading a station, let's say you're pulling individual students for a conference or a conversation or maybe a side-by-side grade kind of assessment situation, and you don't necessarily need a specific amount of time yourself to get through instruction, then I have played around with what I call the free flow station rotation, which is everybody starts at a station, but when you're done, you pick up your stuff and you go to the next station and you start the next task. And students love the free flow. They love the agency of being able to say, you know what, I'm done. I don't need to sit here any longer than this. I can go to this station over here. And teachers always worry like, oh, but won't you have a bunch of kids who end up at a station? It's never really that big of a deal. There's never a big backup at a station. They tend to do really well with it. And I have coached first grade teachers that use free flow. So sometimes high school teachers will say, I can't do that. Students can't handle it. And I'm like, I've seen first graders do it. Your teenagers can do it.
It's a matter of having the classroom environment for it to happen, and also teaching it, just like we teach. In New Zealand, we often do reading rotations and reading activities during our literacy time, and we actually have to physically teach them, and we stop and we check in and how's it going, and so it's the same thing, right? It's like you actually have to actively teach them how to do these rotations and not just go, okay, today we're going to, and off they go, of course.
Right.
And
that's a great point.
And I really love that idea of that agency when students have the ability to say, hey, I'm done. I can move on now. And I know that my daughter, she spends probably not as long at tasks as other students in her classroom, so she gets bored very quickly. And it's possibly because she's not doing it to the depth that some are, possibly because she has. There could be many reasons. But I feel like she spends a lot of time just doing nothing.
Well, and you know what happens when kids they're all done early and they're just forced to sit there? Then they make their own fun. I think so many classroom management issues are born because either the material is too easy, it's too hard, it's too fast, it's too slow. And as soon as we allow kids the opportunity to control those pieces, then I think, and we obviously want to keep them engaged and make it as relevant and interesting as possible, but then we're going to have fewer management issues because, oh, I'm done. I'm going to go up and I'm going to work on this thing over here.
Yeah, that's right. And my son, he was in a high school where they had bring your own device. It was when they were first starting their whole online and, foray into that. And he's 20 now, so it's a wee while ago. But because they'd have all this writing on the board and he'd just take a photo. And then he's got an iPad sitting in front of him. So what if he's going to do? Of course he's going to go and play a game. Of course he's going to go and surf the web, look up his sports team or whatever. And all his school reports would say, is distracted by technology. And that was because back then teachers really didn't understand how we use technology in the classroom. So
he was a little ahead.
Yeah, he was. So, Catlin, you talk about an online community of inquiry. What is that?
Yeah. So one of my concerns is that as we shift online really quickly and teachers really haven't been given the support or the training, is that the focus becomes on disseminating and collecting assignments. But disseminating and collecting assignments isn't teaching, right? Teaching is an art form. And what I want teachers to do is to think about as they move online, we spend all this time and energy creating these communities of learners in our classrooms, right? We create a safe space. We proactively build relationships. We have to take that same intentionality online. And the community of inquiry really talks about these three presences: the teacher presence, the social presence, and then this cognitive presence. And so the teaching presence is really our ability to design, to instruct, to facilitate learning online. The social presence is really about can students feel comfortable engaging in conversation? Can they project their actual selves and their values and their opinions online? And then we have this cognitive presence, which is about really going through that inquiry of learning. Like, here's a question, here's a problem, let's research, let's talk, let's make meaning, let's have a solution. And so I want teachers to think about that community of inquiry when we move online. Like, how are we embracing those roles as teachers? How are we supporting students in developing that social presence so they feel comfortable engaging in academic conversations, collaborating on shared tasks? And so it's a much more like you have these learners online really digging into this inquiry process together, guided by the teacher. And that's where I hope if we can take a step back and think about online learning being just something that we may need to get used to as being part of our lives, whether it's blended or entirely online or whatever, that we can start to approach building that community of inquiry with a lot of intention so that we're not just kind of throwing assignments at kids online.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. I'm like, oh, I just want to spend the next 2 hours discussing this because it's just like we're talking, singing from my hymn book. This is wonderful. Catlin, tell me, I know that we have a PDF that we'll put in the chat down below after we get offline. And so it's about how teachers can transition to be online, about being vocal. Can you just quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's a gentleman called Savory who wrote this article that I thought was brilliant, and he uses the acronym VOCAL to just get online teachers thinking about the traits of a successful online teacher. And as most of us are feeling like total fish out of water, I thought it would be helpful to share it. So he talks about the online teacher as being visible, organized, compassionate/caring, analytical, and leading by example. And so I loved that, and I loved everything he said about it. And then I wanted to anchor those characteristics in actual behaviors. So what does it mean to be visible? It means you're making regular announcements, you're posting discussion questions, and you're facilitating online conversations, you're hosting weekly synchronous sessions, you're providing timely feedback, you're supporting learners with regular office hours. So for me, sometimes when I read articles that are really kind of like theoretical or research-based, I always want to pin it into practice for teachers. And so I just thought it would be a nice way to get them thinking about, okay, these are things I want to do online, and this is what it looks like.
Right. So we'll put that down in the chat so people can download it. So thanks for that, and any other, and those other grids and bits and pieces you've got. Thank you so much. So as we begin to finish up, any final tips for particularly our teachers who have been sort of feel like they've been thrown into this? What other ideas can we finish up with?
I would say just bring to this on, at least for the rest of the school year, embrace a less is more mantra for yourself, or like a mentality, because one of the things that I think is easy to forget is that everything we do online, particularly for students, since a lot of it is text mediated, means it's going to take longer. So I was reading something on Twitter, and somebody said, like, take your normal plan, cut it in half, and then cut it in half one more time. And I was like, yeah, that's about right. Like, you must think much more modularly in these smaller bite size when you're preparing for an online course. And I'm also a big advocate that if you can kind of dump the work you want kids to do, the resources, the assignments at the start of the week on, say, a Sunday evening or a Monday morning, and then give them the week to self-pace through it so they can actually enjoy the flexibility that online learning affords, that is also, I think, can be really helpful for students and also for parents, because you have a lot of people navigating shared spaces and shared bandwidth and shared devices. And if we don't give them flexibility, we're going to have kids who feel like they're failing when they just need more time. Absolutely.
And I know one family that I'm aware of has 7 children and 1 device in their home. And you can imagine trying to get airtime
right.
Really, really challenging. So,
yeah, and kind of like chunking, like little mini bite-sized pieces. So I almost think about when I plan for a regular lesson, I'm like, okay, we're going to do some instruction, we're going to do some discussion, we're going to do this. All of those individual pieces become kind of separate activities in my mind when I think about online learning.
Thank you so much. So I'll also put in the chat where people can get hold of you, where they can follow you and even see your books, because I know we've only just touched the surface of information, and this doctorate comes through. Dr. Catlin Tucker is going to be pretty amazing.
Oh my God.
I'm amazed if you're that close that you're even talking to me. I thought
of course.
I thought when you're that close, it's like you're like head down, tail up. But
that's most of my day.
I understand. So thank you so much, and I will put the information in the chat. So for our viewers, thank you for being online with us today. Again, if you're watching the replay, you can still put questions in the chat box, still put your reflections in there. We will keep monitoring this. And for our New Zealand viewers, we're not going to, this is the only Spectrum TV episode this week. for those who've been following my adventures, I get to go home tomorrow. Woohoo! I have my official papers.
So
And
fun.
so I'm going to take a few days off, but we'll be back with some new guests next week, and same time, 4 p.m. So thank you again, Catlin, for your wealth of knowledge and your information. And for our viewers, please stay safe and keep learning. So thank you.